Thank you all for joining us in today. I hope you all are doing well. My name is Emma and I'm the Communications Jedi here at Good Life X. Like I said, we're so excited to have you here for our third session of the Regenerating a Creative Future conversation series. This series of 5 conversations is brought to you by the Creative Economy Program at the British Council Sri Lanka and Good Life X, working in partnership with British Council's program Making Matters, our media partners at Roar Media, and our industry expert, Lonali Rodrigo. So tonight's session is focused on the next generation's influence on creating smart, creative systems for the future. We will be discussing how the younger generation views system change for the future, how they use lateral thinking in their work, and of course, how to move forward. Your wonderful set of panelists tonight are Danielle Elsener, who's a founder at Decode in Brooklyn, of Decode in Brooklyn, New York, sorry. Alina Fernando, intersectional environmentalist. Suresh Madushan, social innovation entrepreneur and founder of Ideal 6 Private Limited in Wagga, Lanka. Kavindya Thennakoon, who's a learning experience designer. And our moderator, Anushka Wijesinha, who's a co-founder of the Center for a Smart Future. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Anushka to get us started.
Thank you very much, Emma. Good evening, everyone, for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, but also joining us on Facebook Live from different communities who have joined us this evening for this very interesting conversation. Systems change isn't easy and sometimes can feel quite daunting. Without us knowing what the entry points are, where do we start? But what's I think great about this evening's conversation is that we have several people who are actually driving change in the systems they operate. And they've already demonstrated that systemic change is possible. Many of them have brought in elements of creativity, different types of creativity and ingenuity into that work. And indeed, some of their work has implications and relevance for creating lateral change in other systems than the one they're operating in. And some of them have actually gone ahead to make those lateral shifts. These are some of the topics we're going to explore today. We also want, I think what's important is to bringing these younger perspectives on system change and the creativity element, because sometimes I feel that folks who have been at it for many, many years tend to perhaps be jaded, and they might have blind spots in seeing what's truly possible, and that optimism and tenacity in bringing about systems change, seeing new opportunity to do that. So hopefully you'll get a glimpse of that from the individuals and their work that are being showcased today. So we have a bunch of questions that we thought would be interesting to explore with our panelists. Some of them might go into a bit more specific detail into their work. But I thought we'll start off with something that gives all of us a sense of their work and how they've approached it. So my opening question to all of you, and perhaps I'll start with Danielle and then move on to Alina, to Suresh, and then Kavindya, is give us a sense of what you've done so far. If you were to look back on what you've done so far, can you point us to 1 or 2 things that you feel are you're most proud of achieving in this space, and what is the system change you're going for, and what's the space you're trying to change? So let's kick things off with Danielle.
Yeah, definitely. Easy question. So easy to say succinctly too. So I work in the field of zero waste systems design for apparel specifically at the moment. I'd say one of the biggest changes that I've been working towards is just this idea of designing backwards. The current fashion industry is so linear, and we're all trying to move to a circular economy, but in the world of zero waste design, you kind of have to start at the end and work backwards to the beginning. So I think that's one of the most difficult things to kind of get people to understand. that in my working/educational life, I've gone from school to industry, back to school, and now off on my own. And so I think the biggest shift has been, and we talked about this a little bit when we were all chatting earlier, but going from working within the system, within the existing fashion industry, to working outside the system, yet still knowing the same vernacular and the way to talk to people about like this change that we're trying to instill. So that's where I'll leave it for now. But yeah, thank you.
I'm definitely going to come back to you, Danielle, on this idea of change from within versus change from outside, to dig in a bit deep. Let's move on to Alina. Give us a sense of, looking back, what change do you feel you've achieved so far, and give us a sense of, in your mind, what system are you trying to change?
That is actually a very difficult question. Like Danielle said, I think for me, what I've been doing, it isn't just one system. I feel like a lot of different types of systems interlap in what I kind of am doing in my activism. So essentially, I delve into system change in the fashion industry, in fast fashion, especially. There's a lot of more systemic change needed in the kind of like consumerism. I would say mostly consumerism. So consumerism goes into so many different aspects, and fashion is one part of it. So the bad side of capitalism and overconsumption, which is a consumeristic, lifestyle, and just a consumeristic kind of mentality of what how we've become as a society. So breaking down that into being just more intentional and mindful in the way you purchase, to who you're supporting. If you're being, there's a lot of really just kind of red tape around a lot of industries, especially the apparel industry, when it comes to fast fashion and unethical practices when it comes to, working in the fast fashion industry as a factory worker versus someone as a CEO and stuff like that. So I can go into that a lot, but that's kind of where I'm going to stop. Yeah.
I have a quick follow-up for you, Alina, because I think some of our audience might be curious to understand this. So intersectional environmentalists, could you unpack that for us? Because I think even in that there is a, kind of connotation of lateralism right there. So could you tell us how you identify yourself as one?
Yeah, so to be an intersectional environmentalist, it's intersectionality means that two separate topics or two separate areas connect together and interlink. So when you're an intersectional environmentalist, you're not looking at just the raw environmental issue that might be happening. There's social issues that are going on. There's economic issues happening. So all of that combined. So you're not just looking at, for example, with fashion industry, there's a lot of carbon emissions to the waste that fashion produces, in landfills, to the pollution from the water, the resource itself, water, to everything else. It's used a lot, in excess and all of that. So that's the environmental side. But then the social side would be, the unethical practicing. So workers being put in, sweatshop kind of conditions and not getting not even getting a minimum wage, to, working so hard to get all this out there for people, and people not really knowing that side of it. And the economic side is also, again, it kind of intertwines with the social, because CEOs are earning, what a worker makes in like its entire lifetime. They're earning that in about 3 days working in a big fashion corporate company. So the economic side of that as well, if that makes more sense. Yeah.
I was planning on moving on to Suresh, but I feel that there's a bit more to dig in here around apparel, because we've been talking about apparel and the fashion system. So, Daniel, if I can just come to you, when you hear Alina talk about some of these issues, I mean, you, from what I understand, you've been in the apparel industry, you've seen it, you've been on that side. Now you're trying to make change from outside. How do you even begin those conversations to try and change the system when you're kind of an insider, outsider? You understand, you have an appreciation for the industry and the challenges they face, and also the opportunities they create, but you also see what's not working and what needs to be done. So how do you almost approach those conversations with those kind of CEOs and those big corporates, those vested interests that may not have any interest in creating system change?
Yeah, definitely. I think now these conversations are a lot easier than when I started having them. Like 10 years ago, no one really cared about zero waste design, what I was doing, because it was kind of a bit far off at the time. And now that, conversations are changing a bit more towards sustainability and ethical creation, it's getting a little bit easier. I will say that in order to kind of get in the door with some brands and trying to make this change, one of the most impactful things I can do specifically in like my system is, zero waste design saves material and saves money. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what what companies come down to at the end of the day, saving money. So those are easy introduction points, but the larger conversations around like changing the system of how things are made, it's often coming from the ground up within companies. Like the customers or the like even newer entry, like lower level employees are having these really great ideas around how things can improve, because they're usually the most recently in school or most exposed to new ideas. And so starting like from the ground up and empowering the people from within the company who are even a bit lower level, empowering them to start having those conversations wider and louder. I think that's one of the most important things possible. Yeah, I hope that kind of addresses the question. We can always come back to it.
Absolutely, and I'm just curious to know what was one of the most startling or interesting responses you got when you moved out of the industry and went back in to have these conversations and try and make change. Could you give us a glimpse of an interesting reaction, a startling reaction, a difficult reaction that you had? Any of the above or all of the above?
Yeah,
from a CEO or from an apparel or fashion industry leader.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things is when I was working within the existing system, a lot of the things I was working on ended up getting pushed to the side, or like just not really, it was never given the time or the space it needed to grow. And then I think it's kind of, because I believed in it so much, I left and went and did it. And the reactions of people knowing how far I've gotten in just like a couple years outside of being out of the industry. We opened our own manufacturing system because we couldn't get the existing one to work for us or with us, and just the kind of shock of, oh, you're actually doing it. Like we couldn't do it ourselves, but you are like, you're your own person and you went off and did it. And I think that the kind of shock of, oh, you actually believe in this much to go do it yourself. I'd say that's usually the biggest reaction. And then it kind of makes people think a little bit more and are like, oh, okay, this is valid. Like it's getting attention and, it's it proves that it works. So I think that in addition to the kind of shock of going and doing it, it gives it more validity and lets people listen to it, want to engage with it a bit more.
Fantastic. Suresh, I'd like to come to you to move the conversation to someone who is who's from a technology background, technology interventions, and I'll probably ask you later about how that got then linked to other sectors outside of the technology space, surprisingly. But tell us, if you were to look back at the last couple of years and, which system or systems are you trying to change, and what has been your work and the response so far?
So Anushka, I will share my personal experience, what I studied in last few years, because in my school time, there was a myth that came on with that A-level art stream people can't go for the science degree. So I told that my one of teacher that I'm going to study in my degree in BSc. So he laughed with all of the students in the class. But finally, I have my BSc with science degree in my A-level in art background. So that kind of myth I defeat in our own country. So people now can do arts and get their degree in BSc level. So that kind of thing can be in. Then I entered to my university in Lateral, so it's a state university. So even in the technology competitions or the other things are not relevant to that kind of state university because they were not in the center of the Colombo. So that kind of problems came on with our university. So we built a team in our university, talented persons, and top universities in our country. So we defeated few teams, and we have won several competitions, and we have represented outside of our country. So that kind of barriers we have defeated with last few years. And then I have proved that we can build technology or any kind of entrepreneur or the enterprise in Sri Lanka without having any money. So I have to do that because there were several funds from the even in UNDP and even in ICA. We can present now our idea to the government, and we can bring that idea related in the community and bring some good social impact to the environment or the community. So that kind of thing we have done in past few years, and we have changed different kind of level of the innovation and the ideas. So that's what I have done in past few years. So far I'm happy. So we have to do more, and that's what I'm doing in the past few years in COVID situations.
Okay, Suresh, I'm going to come back to you in a bit to pick up on that last point you mentioned about how you've then gone on to engage with potential community change through change in another system. So I want to move to Kavindya now, because Suresh touched on a very important thing relating to education, and we all know that that's a system that has been ripe for change for a long time. And Kavindya, you've been doing it initially at a grassroots level here in Sri Lanka, but now also you have exposure to a whole host of new tools and approaches in systems change in this education space. Could you tell us a little bit about that and your approach?
Absolutely. Anush, before I start, am I audible and is it clear?
Yes, your voice is audible. Your camera is a bit choppy, but it doesn't matter.
Okay,
we can
sure.
hear you well.
Okay, fabulous. So it's ironic because I'm joining from Thennakoon, where I was born and raised. And here we only have internet access under one tree. And there was a rain shower. So I'm under like a little hut. So hopefully things go smoothly. I think it's a testament to sort of lack of access and how some of these underlying systems, especially in education, are so broken. Let me switch off my camera just so that the voice will be a little more clearer. I think for me, when it comes to sort of systems change in education, I started off in Thennakoon. That's where I started sort of being exposed to learning, educators, understanding what access means in learning, and then slowly transitioned into a sort of a more global learning arena and understanding what the systems change look like there. I think for me right now, I started working with young people and schools, and then realized that it's way too late to start at the age of 13 or 15. So for me, that was sort of my big learning in systems change to realizing that it's so much more impactful to start with 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and taking that step back and realizing that all these different entities are part of a bigger system and finding out what is the most impactful lever that we can leverage. So I think that has been my biggest learning so far. But and my second learning is, I think we realized after COVID that there are so many players in the learning space: telecommunication companies, educators, designers, teachers, primary school teachers, secondary school teachers, parents are involved. So I think COVID helped us look at the education system in sort of a more broader sense. And that's also been sort of one of my biggest learnings so far. Yeah.
I'm going to come back to you, Kavindya, on a point you mentioned about the technology piece linked to actually where you are right now around, change at the grassroots. Let's go back to Suresh for a minute, and I now want to take the conversation in the direction of the key word in the lexicon we want to introduce, which is lateral. And Suresh, I think you've actually gone ahead and done that, because while you started off developing technology solutions with, I guess, no intention of taking it to perhaps local government, you've now actually done that where introducing these change solutions to local government and addressing some of those systemic issues at the local government level. So could you tell us exactly what that is and what the results you've seen so far, and how you kind of took what you did in the technology space to then try and make system change in a broken local government system?
We start from the unit. It's because we introduce.
Sorry, we might need to ask you to maybe turn the video off for a little bit while you're speaking so that we can hear you better.
Okay. So Anushka, we started the university project as a solution for the water crisis in Lateral area. So the solution came out with quality and provide GPS location for the clean water trucks were delivering. So the solution came in with the national level, but the government situation funding. We get a fund from the UNDP, and they introduce you can do whatever the solution that you have built for the community to achieve the SDG goals. So we so I have discussed with my municipal council. You can do track your garbage vehicle, that where is they are moving, or what kind of the things we can discuss with the their problems. Basically, they have facing. Looking at that problem, we have developed a solution for that kind of problem. Basically, first we give them for tracking solution. First time, I have never done that kind of solution. Even I don't have a technology background in my jobs. Even I have never done in the software company. So I have built with the reference of the knowledge in the internet. So we have done that successfully. Even some mistake happened, but we have corrected it perfectly. And then we identify dialogue, and the mobile company also doing that kind of thing. So they were failed to introduce this solution to municipal councils because of the we don't know the problem, but we have reached that problem and discuss with them what kind of solution they were offering and why they were failed. So we neglect that kind of fail kind of thing, and we introduce mobile location tracking supporting system for the waste. That means you don't need an IoT device to track the garbage that filled up. You have to discharge this. So people can mark from their mobile phone there was a dumping location or the field dustbin for the to notify the municipal council, so they can watch out and they can remove that perfectly. So that kind of system we have introduced, and we have given a few public services that public can directly campaign their to the municipal council, and they can get the directly feedback from the mobile app, so they don't need to go to the municipal council every time that their work have been done on questioning every time. So the people can save their time, and we have introduced this concept. And next we have introduced, therefore, to protect their environment, to rebuild their nature. If I can share my screen, I can show how they design their environment to modern culture. So that kind of we have did that kind of consulting for the municipal council also, and we have joined the youth for this program, because they were like to live in a clean and environment. So they were joining with us, and they participate for the tree planting programs, and they were participate for beach cleanups. They were participate for the clean up their cities, because we need to show this solution to the general public, that this kind of thing happening in your city, because not introducing the technology is not a good habit to promote it. We have to bring this to the community. So that kind of thing we have done in past municipal council system. And
Suresh, I just want to I just want to jump in there to ask you something. Do you think that now local governments and government officials are more open to work with young people, perhaps, but also outside entities coming in with technology solutions? Because typically how these agencies, organizations work is that, you know, they put out a tender. Usually it's the large organizations, the ones which have a very traditional track record. They are quite hesitant to go with younger people, with startups, with you know, technology solutions that haven't come from big vendors. Do you think now this is changing, and government, particularly local government, are open to outside solutions, innovative solutions like this?
Anushka, Anushka, it's not a, I can't say exactly this can be done. Any kind of people who would like to change the environment, because there was some challenge I have also faced, because my first impression is good with the my municipal council mayor, because he is a who like to change his city. But when I go to the CMC, Colombo Municipal Council, they don't like this kind of system, because they what they told is that they have a bigger problem more than this, that they can get 1,000 or more than the campaign came from the one day that they can't handle. If they can't handle that kind of problem in the positive way, the total bad image can be came to their side. So that kind of political or the people mindset will affect your innovative solution that you are trying to bring this municipal council. And second thing is, the government policies always demotivate you, because they will not like to go on with the better solution with the municipal council, because they were fully corrupted. Even in now, I have gone through more than 50 local councils. I have participated with their major meetings, but most of them all are corrupted, because I have seen European Union funded, even in UNDP funded, even in what other funded they were came in for that municipal council. They only approach that fund not to do the work. They want to get that fund only, not to do the work. That kind of thing happening. So you need to be innovative. You need to be tricky how to implement this kind of solution to the this municipal council. If you want to do the proper way, you need to be the mayor of one of council, and you need to prove that this should be done without any problem or without any. You can do this existing system. I don't know if you
Yeah,
need to be the creative person for that kind of thing.
I think you make a very valid point there, because also that credibility comes in, particularly with young people with solutions. And to Danielle's point about, how people's reaction is different when they realize, oh, you're actually going ahead and doing it. You're getting a track record. And building that credibility. Kavindya, I want to come to you on a point you mentioned about technology access, but also, to my earlier point about this, the tendency to go with some of the bigger firms, a big technology. I mean, you were based in one of the heartlands of big technology companies, but you're creating system change at the grassroots with your organization before and continuing that work. So how does that fit in with this idea of creating system change? Does it make it, is there a way to bring those two worlds together, or are they in conflict? Tell us a bit about how you've experienced that from going as a grassroots activist, promoting these education initiatives, to also now seeing the role of big technology companies, big corporates entering this space also around education.
I think that's such a good question. Let me know if you want me to switch off my video if the audio is not clear. I think it's mainly sort of two things. One, I'll first talk about big tech and the disconnect. My full-time job, I work for a very large social media company, which is a very questionable motive if you're coming from a grassroots activist space. I don't necessarily identify myself as an activist, but as a grassroots educator, that's a very questionable place to be. With my sort of 1 foot in sort of Silicon Valley and this big tech space, it's not a space that I would have ever thought of being in, coming from Danielle and this environment I'm like dialing in from. It's kind of worlds apart. The biggest issue I see in big tech is that the reality that big tech is solving for is so different to the real problem.
Kavindya, maybe we'll come back to you.
That sounds great.
Might have better connectivity. Danielle, going along this idea of lateral and applicability of change, system change in one system, say the fashion system, or the apparel system, to others. Is this something that you're looking at? Do you see applicability in your approach to creativity and innovation in the system you are in to others? And in fact, give us a sense of whether you've already explored that or others have tried to explore it with you.
Yeah, definitely. So there are so many industries where this system is applicable, or where we can learn things from other systems and take it into our own. With apparel, one of the things that I'm most passionate about is making like an FDA for fashion, the Food and Drug Administration, where every ingredient has to be listed on a package. Why isn't that done for fashion as well? But in my own practice of zero waste design, anything you're making with material can be done in a zero waste method, basically. So there's applications in any other material-based industry, which is really exciting. Of course, fashion is my lens for right now, but I definitely have aspirations to move outside of it. And one of the really interesting things that we're working through right now is we've been approached by a lot of kind of future-facing Web3, like crypto-based fashion brands who want to make a physical, tangible output of clothing along with their, like NFTs and what have you that they're making. And it's a really interesting conversation because the way that, cryptocurrency is disrupting the financial system, we're disrupting the fashion system with what we're doing with the whole radical transparency model, and every single step along the way is tracked, and who did what, when, that kind of thing. So that's been a really interesting journey, and we're continuing to explore that and see what it actually means. Does there actually need to be a physical, tangible output of clothing that goes along with it? Does it add to the story, or does it just add more noise? How can you thoughtfully, selectively create things that add to the positivity of what you're doing? instead of just, again, making more.
I just want to explore that a bit. You know, you mentioned FDA-like organizational approaches, but we're also talking about, you know, completely decentralized, unregulated systems. So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on, you know, are we moving towards a more radically decentralized approach to this, where everybody, you know, it's really led by consumers and producers and folks in the supply chain driving the kind of system change? Or do you still see a role for yes, system change, but, you know, some of the more established organizations playing a role, coming to the realization that they also need to change? Just trying to understand where you think it is. Is it something more very radical, where it's very individual, initiative driven, folks, you know, thousands of folks like you and others? Or do you think when we say system change, we also mean some of those, you know, fairly staid traditional organizations also coming along on that journey?
Yeah, it's a very pointed question, because you're right. It is two sides of like a very opposite coin that I'm talking about, huh? So I think that in general, the way that change is going to happen is through this these radical systems, because it's something completely new that can really change what we're doing. And I think that individuals being able to take on change and make these new ideas, it wouldn't be able to happen in these larger companies. Like this idea inception of how we can actually change things needs to kind of be done in the ether and then eventually brought into the corporations. You know, it's really hard to make change in an existing system. Change is the thing that everyone fights the most. And it really does, I think it will ultimately come from the ground up. Like, I don't see any reason for one of the large fashion brands to really change what they're doing, because the consumers keep buying. There's nothing stopping them from continuing to do what they're doing. So I think also kind of tying into the education side of things that we've been talking about, we need to continue educating consumers and educating designers that there are other ways of doing things. And like in my work, there are patterns that I give away for free just as an educational tool, because I want to show that anyone can do zero waste design. And that does make it really, it does bring it to an individual level. And that's how you can make a lot of change. You know, changing one person's mind about how things are done just really has this huge ripple effect. And the more individuals that you can affect with your ideas, I think that's where the most change is going to come from.
Great. Danielle, when you talked about, you know, getting more people to do it and, you know, spreading that education, awareness, and inspiring others, I feel like Alina might have an input on this, because your channel for influencing change is really around social media and digital. So could you talk us a little bit about what your experience has been so far in, you know, going beyond just, you know, short-lived responses to, you know, you've been doing this for a while, you've been consistent. So how do you use digital and how you use social media, and the role you think that plays in this idea of getting everyone to do it and creating system change where more people buy into the change you're wanting to create?
Yeah, so just to dive in, basically, I started doing digital or social media activism because it was another way of, you know, when you're talking about lateral thinking and lateral change, I noticed even going to the US and studying environmental studies there and all sorts of, you know, different topics in sustainability and stuff, there was so much that I didn't know and I was never taught in Sri Lankan education system. So to go over that system, I decided that it would be an interesting thing to try out social media as a way to raise awareness about environmental issues and everything that I was learning personally while I was a student in college, as well as from, you know, reading different articles to following similar activists all over the world and kind of just doing my own research. And that all really just kickstarted me wanting to share more with everybody here. So essentially, what I try to kind of relay to everybody else who follows me or who just, looks into the content that I put out is that systemic change can occur if we take on individual actions. If a lot of us collectively do that, we could cause systemic change from the outside of the system. So essentially, as an individual, I was taught, like from when I was younger as well, that there's so much that needs to change in the system itself and the industries and the people in power who actually have the voice. But we as individuals have a voice too. And that was something that that is something that I try to bring out every day in my activism online, because a lot of people assume that they don't have anything to do, like they don't have a choice in what's happening, and they don't have an option or the basic essential need to be able to make this kind of change. So for me, I try to get people to understand that individual actions really do make a difference. So for instance, one area where you kind of a different approach to consumerism or that, consumeristic lifestyle is voting with your dollar. So, or voting with your wallet. So voting with your dollar or your rupee or whatever currency is where you are advocating or supporting brands based on what you're purchasing. So within time, if more and more people start doing that and don't just, I would like to say less consciously, but, mindlessly buying things for the sake of buying them, because that's the way the capitalistic industry works. They're trying to promote this to gain profit for themselves. And it becomes a thing that our generation, especially my generation, if you're not upgrading into the newest technology, or if you're not, consistent with the trends that are happening in fashion, and you're not, wearing the newest style, it's outdated and it's not mainstream, which means that you aren't kind of sticking to the way the system is working. So for me, what I have been doing and what I've been telling people to do is to go against that, which is, being more conscious about the purchasing that you're making. Don't just, don't just look at something and go, okay, I'm going to buy this. Think about why you want to buy it. Do you actually need it? Is this a brand that, is actually doing something that's good for people and the planet? Is there really bad unethical practices involved in their, their supply chain, their everything? So that's one thing that I try to kind of advocate for, which is we have a big say. And so with that, the hope is that eventually, and I think it's already caught on a lot more in countries like the US and especially in Europe, is that companies are noticing that people are now seeing that they need to be more conscious about who they're purchasing from, and are finally being aware, because this is all information that has been spread through the internet. If I didn't have those technological ability to kind of share this information, have that as a resource, people in the US wouldn't know what was happening in Sri Lanka, and I wouldn't know what was happening in the US if that was the case. So just kind of, it's a really big movement, the social media activist movement, because it's a really great way to kind of meet like-minded people, because I have spoken to so many different people all over the world, and they're doing similar things that I'm doing here in all over the world in Sri Lanka. So a big part of that is slow fashion movement. So that includes telling people, don't worry about what other people say. You can repeat wearing your own clothes. You can purchase from thrifted places. You don't have to buy something new. And with that in mind, slow fashion kind of gives people who don't have access to, much high quality clothing, expensive clothing, to be able to feel more comfortable in a space where they can purchase secondhand, where they can choose something that's better for them and their wallet as well. So yeah.
Alina, you brought up an interesting point here that makes me want to explore the idea of how do you bring, when we say we want to bring on more people and getting everyone to do it, there is, of course, the older generation. And I'm conscious that this panel, the topic is a lot about the role of young people. So maybe you can think about that for a bit until I get to Kavindya, because Kavindya, especially in education, there's a disproportionate role that older people play in decision making around it, whether it's in ministries, in the school system. But what's your experience like in driving system change in education, particularly the response of the older generation? And have they been responsive? Have there been obstacles? Are they beginning to come around? And I'm going to ask the same question of, this is actually a question coming from the audience, I should have said. It's been messaged to us, I think, through Facebook. So I'm going to ask that to Kavindya, and the same with Alina, given your focus on social media and digital, and also to Suresh. So Kavindya, over to you first.
Thanks, Anush. Is the audio okay? Is it?
Yes.
Amazing. So I'll keep it short. I think one of the things I've seen is that we need to meet people where they're at. A lot of decision makers, especially in the education system at large, went to school 30 years ago. And if you look at the education system now, if you take, let's say, a 13-year-old or a 10-year-old, the kind of jobs that they would be doing hasn't even been created yet. So I think there is this mismatch between the people who are making decisions versus the world that they have seen and the world they're designing for. I think two main things that I've done and that has had some work, that has had some impact. Firstly is that bringing people who are from a different generation into your leadership. My co-founder at Tilly is 56. So it's basically, when she's in the room with me, people who are at that age range of sort of 50 plus automatically have this approval seal, because I have somebody who they can relate to, who understands their language on my side. And I think the second thing that I've seen is that we need to speak their language. For instance, I would go into a space and say, we need to make social emotional learning accessible. But for a teacher who's been in the industry for 40 years, 30 years, their focus is on disciplining kids. So instead of going and saying social emotional learning, I would say, how can we better discipline kids? So I think it's really a creative use of language and having age diversity in your leadership.
Kavindya, and to be clear, Tilly is the education, the tool that you develop, right? Or the program or the package, which
yes.
Maybe our audience might be interested to hear a little bit about that, because you do have collaboration, I think, with different groups, different age groups. So,
yes. Yeah. So Tilly it was actually my graduate school thesis that I started in 2019. And there was interest from parents and teachers. It's a social emotional learning tool for 5 to 10-year-olds. And we designed for classrooms as well as homes. So it's designed for teachers to play in their classrooms and also parents to play with their kids. So for us, it's a lot to do with convincing educators, the Ministry of Education, donors, telecommunication companies to make us free and to white label tools like us. So it's really sort of mapping the system. Yeah.
And do you see applicability of Tilly outside of the education, strict kind of education space, to other spaces around learning and
absolutely
thinking through problems differently as a tool?
Yeah, I think
using it as a tool.
I think with what you spoke about lateral thinking, the initial problem that Tilly set about to solve was gender-based violence. That was the problem that I had in mind. Like, how can we make environments safer? How can we ensure that perpetrators don't get caught in cycles of violence? This was the initial problem. And it's interesting how when you map the system, you realize I ended up with 5 to 10-year-olds. But the problem at the core was gender-based violence. And I looked at sex education, I looked at awareness campaigns, and realizing that it's way too late. How can we talk to 5-year-olds? So I think that's one thing. And I think the second thing with this is we're also looking at informal learning spaces, the veranda, the TV room, when you're going with your kid in the bus to school. How can this learning tool be applicable to situations like that? And also for adults, we have a lot of teachers now using some of the tools we designed with their husbands, because they say, well, my husband doesn't know how to express himself, so I've been using these emotion cards with him. So it's just interesting how far these tools go and the different spaces they go into and the problems they tend to solve. So yeah.
Okay, great. I want to pose the same question to Alina. Alina, digital, social media, these all tend to be associated with a certain age group. But if we are to bring along everyone, older generation matters. So this is actually a question from the audience, specifically initial to Alina, about the response from older generations to your activism on social media. I also want to roll in another question from the audience to Alina. Sustainable products tend to be priced on the higher end. What are your thoughts on how these can be made more accessible?
Yeah, so, okay, with how the older generation reacts to my digital activism, I think that's a really great question. It's quite interesting that, well, especially I think the thing with digital activism is it's not accessible to everybody. So I try, obviously, digital activism is not where it should end. There should be activism in physical activism, and we should be continuing education in a physical sense as well, where it's not through digital modes of communication and stuff. So the older generation, I think they find it interesting. I've personally, from many people in the older generation, especially my parents' generation, were quite interested that I was using something that they don't really like too much, which is social media, in a more positive way compared to a lot of the negative aspects that social media brings, like insecurities, to bullying, to that kind of stuff. So they did like that part of it. And yeah, I think to move on to the other question, with sustainable products being obviously higher priced, that is the case in most things because of the longevity of them. They're not supposed to be something that you repurchase like a normal product that would be single use or, you know, in a plastic container. A lot of these sustainable products are made to kind of change the system again from a linear economy to a circular economy, which means that from when it's produced to consumed and whatever, and then disposed, instead of going to disposal, it goes back into that loop, which is it's reassembled or it's refilled or it's reused to make something else. So that's why sustainable products are tend to be a bit more on the pricier end. But the idea is that you're investing in something that's going to last you a much longer time, which is a lot better quality. It is better for your health and better for other people as well as the environment. But especially with sustainable brands and products in mind, there's always some sort of alternative that you could choose, which is on a cheaper end. So they, you know, for an example, reusable utensils, they have like a utensil kit that you can buy. You don't have to buy that. You could just get your cutlery from home, put it in a napkin and take it out with you. You don't need to purchase all these different things. So that's just an example. And if you are, yeah, if you're interested, you can definitely message me any other time and I will love to give more of an answer.
That's the kind of positive and action-oriented note we wanted to begin to close the session on. So I'm going to jump here to Danielle to ask the same question around, you know, when you hear about this older gen, younger gen kind of divide when trying to influence systems change, Is this something that resonates with you at all, or are you now seeing, regardless of generation, everyone kind of coming to a common realization? And maybe you can wrap up your comment with leaving us with, like Alina did, something, you know, action-oriented that either you have done or you're planning on doing, and we could do too.
Yeah, definitely. So to answer the first question, I don't find as much of a generational difference in my line of work. I think it's whether it's how long you've been in the industry that kind of jades your thinking. I think it's not directly related to age, and just in my experience. So that's it's been really interesting listening to everyone's thoughts on that. I would say from my perspective, my favorite thing to leave people with, I do a lot of lecturing and mentoring at universities, and the biggest thing you can do and the best thing you can do is just keep asking questions, even if it seems like they're silly or like, you know, it might seem obvious. If you ask the question, it makes someone think about it a little bit more. For students, I always say, you know, there's a very finite amount of time between school and when you're already in your industry, where you are supposed to know everything. There's a few years where you can just ask literally anything, and it's just because you're trying to expand your education and, you know, understand the system better. But it really gives you such a powerful stance to be able to ask those really pointed questions and understand why things are being done a certain way, so that you can learn how you can change it in the future. So that's my like number one positive thing to keep doing, and keep reaching out to people in your network or even outside of your network who are interested in similar things as you, and see how you can, you know, make the power of 1 + 1 = 3.
Great note. As I need to move on to Suresh. Suresh, could we hear from you about your, you know, the response from communities? There's a question here actually: how have communities' response been in adopting smart systems like the one you've introduced in local governments and municipal councils, and particularly given that a big part of these communities are older people holding office, older people as community leaders. So could you tell us a little bit about that briefly?
I mean, Anushka, we had a good plan how to introduce this to the society. We were discussed with the mayor and their staff how we were going to change the environment and the human behavior, because human behavior is the most important thing to change the system. So we discuss each part of how we need to change. So we introduced the solution, and we did the marketing based. That's in the but the first better thing to market this is in the social media. So we did it in the social media, and people noticed that the this municipal council is trying to do something other than other political things. This municipal council trying to do something change, and people getting touch with that. So we have a time plan. So we release between 2 weeks or 1 month different plan, or the different product, or the different innovation idea in the municipal council. The people not randomly, they were frequently monitoring our changes, so they will appreciate us. They will share our thought in the social media, and it the next stage is it gone to the national newspapers and the national media. They were discussed what's going on with this implementing urban council innovation kind of thing. So it came as a viral, and the rest of municipal council questioning what's going on with your council. They came to visit what's kind of difference happening in here. So as a result, I got the opportunity of Western Province Waste Management Authority to introduce this platform to all of the Western Province Council. We introduced that. We did in 2019. And other part of municipal council that they were going with their own initiatives, that even in I have seen Kaduwela Municipal Council, they were tried their own thing with the Morotai University, and few Gampaha Municipal Council, they also try to go with different kind of initiative. So they were trying to do the new kind of thing while following us, right? It did
Okay.
a different impact to the social. So even in the past president, now current president, even he brought us what you are doing in this kind of thing. So what's going to impact with the society? They were tried. And finally, I have to say, unfortunately, the different we have did in the first municipal council in Amlipitia, they may have to go to home because of that kind of initiative change we have done in the local council area. So
that's definitely a sign of system change.
Yeah, that kind of thing can be happen.
Thanks, Suresh, for that. I think there are a couple of comment threads from what you said and something Danielle said earlier that I've used to wrap up. But before I do, Kavindya, there's a question that has come from the audience. It's actually addressed to me, but I'm going to pose it to you and I'll give some thoughts at the end. What can governments do to catalyze system change across sectors like apparel and education? So I'm only going to take education and turn it over to you. And along
awesome.
with, sorry, just also given that you do engage with both grassroots as well as meta level institutions as well as at a policy level, give us a sense of hope and an action point that we can look forward to and work on. So
yeah, I think with the first question, I think three things come to mind with how governments can think through systems change. I think if you look at the education space, the first is that we need to map the system currently. I think in education, the ecosystem has changed so much. We don't even know who the players are. We don't know who the organizations are. We don't know teacher unions. We don't know what are kind of the collectives that teachers have formed, that principals have formed, that students are forming. What are the technologists in this space? So I think the first is to map the ecosystem and understand what is this system. And the second thing is there's a data issue where we don't understand the breadth and the depth of the problem. If you take internet access or basic sanitation facilities in schools, literacy levels, we don't have a good enough idea of what the current state of education looks like. And I think the second issue is that. And the third issue is, I think, even Suresh mentioned this, how can governments start thinking about, especially in education, behavioral change more intentionally? Because if learning is not leading to a behavioral change, then learning is really not really happening. So how can we design learning that actually leads to a change? To your last point of sort of a call to action or what keeps us positive, I think one thing that I would ask is to just have a conversation with someone you disagree with. I think especially in education, something I've tried to do more intentionally is to meet people who I disagree with. I've hated large telcos, and now I partner very closely with large telcos. And if you meet someone over a cup of tea and have a conversation, we'll realize that we're much more similar and we're trying to go achieve a very similar reality and a future, but our means are very different and our fears are a little different. So I think that will be my call to action. Have a conversation with someone you disagree with.
Fantastic, Kavindya. And I think that brings us to the end. We have covered all of the questions that came to us through Facebook Live and also on the chat sent by DM to me as well. This has been a really interesting session because when I was thinking about this session, systems change sounds so daunting. Role of young people in system change, even more daunting. Smart and creativity also added into that. Man, that's a lot to digest. But I think what we've seen with the folks featured today, Alina, Danielle, Suresh, and Kavindya, is that it's possible, and there are probably some messages that I'd like to distill from the discussion. The first is something that Kavindya talked about, the rigor. So when trying to create system change, I think mapping the system, understanding that before trying to take any steps, taking deliberate steps in system change requires you to first understand and map the system. And also, to Danielle's experience, it helps to know where the industry is at right now. So being an insider and then coming out and being able to make that change kind of might help you bring that rigor and understanding. The other big one for me was demonstrate and do. Danielle, Alina, Suresh all talked about it, building that track record, showing what's possible, consistently doing it. In Suresh's case, the proofs of concept and the pilots, which then everyone sits up and takes notice and wants for their own, local government. With Danielle, it was going beyond saying, beyond an idea to actually saying, here's what we're doing and how you need to come on board. The third message to distill, I think, is while we did talk about the lexicon of lateral, I think there's also an intergenerational piece that came out today. And we acknowledge it is an issue. There is a gap in bringing the older generation, but it's not an insurmountable gap. Suresh referred to it, Danielle referred to it. Tilly, Kavindya's startup, has the co-founder who is from the older generation, a deliberate measure to try and bridge those worlds together. And finally, really to re-emphasize what Kavindya said about having a conversation. I don't think we can imagine trying to make systems change by being very happy to be the one little peg in the system and thinking that we can change that without having a conversation with folks who are key players in the system, who we may not have thought we needed to collaborate with. We may have been on opposite ends of an argument with. I think we need to cross the aisle, not sit in our silos, if we truly believe in system change. So these are just some of my thoughts, folks. I hope you continue to engage with the content that will come out of this session. I want to thank all of you for joining, particularly Alina, Danielle, Suresh, and Kavindya. And I hope you continue to think about many of the things that were discussed today and taking some of the actions that I think we all can in whatever system we operate in, and thinking, how could this be applicable, what I'm doing here and now in my system or in my space, to someone else, and perhaps having a conversation might trigger a new possibility. Thank you very much and have a good evening.